Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first live edition of the American Scouser Fantasy Premier League show. And as we come to you preparing for match week 8, we're going to do some reviewing of game week 7 and how things went, options, talk a little bit about the strategy, some of the rule changes that were announced regarding transfers, and more importantly, maybe talk about some of the things we wish we had or hadn't done over the last week to 10 days. And then I think we're probably going to spend a good amount of time talking about the possibility of some wild cards. I think one of us is on a wild card already. The other one, honestly, hasn't made up his mind yet, which means he will make a mistake no matter what he does. And if you haven't picked up on that, that is probably the idiot in the black shirt talking in the third person that hasn't got to the third person yet. So, joined tonight by my partner in crime, Matus. How are we doing, Matus?
Doing really well. Excited for this episode. Glad that some form of football is back in England. So yeah, excited to get to it.
Me too. I mean, gone through a few different sets of losses in my day. I don't know that I've ever mourned anything as much as the loss of 2 back-to-back football matches. But in all seriousness, to all those out there still mourning Her Majesty's passing, I completely understand and appreciate your commitment. But I can't lie. I am very excited for 3 p.m. tomorrow afternoon in Premier League matches that matter to be back. And I would like to say happy and hello to BJ as well.
Hello, BJ.
And of course, we have the hatred that comes in on all-time follow-ups and the fantasy world. We know how it goes. We know not all of it. It may be the worst fantasy sport in the world, but it is the one we will focus on for the next 60 minutes or so. And we'll see how long that goes. I think me and Matus might be able to talk about the mistakes we've made in the last few weeks weeks. So let's get right to it. Match week 7 obviously went off with a whimper. There were no matches. For those out there, just want to make sure people are clear. Match week 7 did exist. We all, if you made 2-3 transfers, you took a negative hit to your overall score. If you were in a head-to-head league and you're dumb enough to make transfers prior to the week starting, like a lot of people do to try to catch those 0.1 price rises, you very well might have lost your head-to-head match instead of running out with a whole bunch of draws like we did. So before we get into the strategies around week 7, we just want to remind everyone out there, anyone viewing, that the Fantasy Premier League Cup is still available and open. You can still join at this point. We would love to see folks join in, keep those numbers growing. We'll start doing some monthly, even half-season standings. So it'd be great here to get some more of our viewers and listeners in, especially now that we're going out live with everybody. So can see Jamie here talking a little bit about our head-to-head league and congratulating the Polish Prince for taking his spot at the top. We'll take a look at that standing in a moment. But first, let's actually take a look at the American Scouser Cup. So the top 10 rolls out. Ted Huddick is at the top. Ted, you are welcome to come on the pod, which means you will quickly plummet outside of the screen. But you are welcome to come on if you would like to, as we always make that offer out there to anyone sitting at the top of the table, except if it's Kelly. And then, of course, she will not be allowed on the podcast because, well, there's only one Galvin making bad predictions on this podcast, and we don't need any more. Matus, we fall off this screen, but I think an honorable mention needs to be mentioned to Ted. 415 points puts him in the top 50,000 of the game overall. So we're represented here on a really high level. Top 1%, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely. Congrats to Ted.
So, Jamie, I appreciate the soft plug for my overall points total, and it will be a fun transition to the next slide, which is probably the quintessential overview of head-to-head fantasy league football and why you play it. Matus sits atop the table at 336 total points, overall score, and 17 points in the league, while I sit in 10th place, wallowing with 5 measly points and 370 overall.
I don't see anything wrong with this.
And, and the crazy part about it is all of that comes out with me only having, a 44-point lead or a 34-point lead in the overall standings, which is about 500,000 people. But that's the beauty of the head-to-head and why we do it. We're having a lot of fun here in this league. We're going to keep talking about it. And we're going to move on here to a little bit later. We'll get back to our top transfers in. But before we get there, we want to review and talk a little bit about the actual week that was week 7. So week 7 was an interesting one without matches. Matus, did you make any transfers that week, or had you already deployed your wild card? What was your strategy around week 7?
So my strategy around week 7 was I was going to use my wild card. I felt like it was the right time to do it for myself, and I waited just enough. And then the news came out about the passing of the Queen, and felt really good about holding on to it, because then we all had no idea what was going to happen. And so I didn't use my wild card just yet. I waited those couple days, and it worked out in my favor. I know several people that ended up taking a few hits, and there was a lot of game theory going around about, if you should free hit or you should wild card, if you should just take the negative points. And I think it was really dependent on your team at that point. And where I was at least, I did not use my wild card yet.
Cool. So I've been really, really probably more than any year in the past, I've been really tight with my transfers. I think I'd only made 3 or 4 transfers. I've almost had 2 available to me since week 2 each week. And I haven't actually made the double move. I've been comfortable with my team as I've consistently got green arrows, yet lost head to head. Frustrated me a little bit because Friday night I realized I have 2 transfers. I can make one by tomorrow morning and roll one over and still have 2. I got wishy-washy on which move I would make. I was most likely going to move off of Mo and downgrade that midfield position. I'm happy I didn't, because I probably would have picked up Sterling, to be honest, for the next 4 or 5 match week fixtures, and I think he's going to do really well under Potter. That said, I got frustrated, got indecisive, fell asleep, and woke up 15 minutes after the deadline. First time the dogs let me sleep past 6 a.m. Eastern, and the bastard had to do it on a day where I could have made a free fantasy transfer. Classic smoking maneuver, other than busting in here earlier and breaking up the podcast a few seconds ago that threw me off. That was my puppy. Appreciate that little bastard too. So I missed my free transfer. I was frustrated about that because when we get to my team later, it really would have been a benefit for me to make 1 move last week, have 2 more this week, and I probably could have got away with no negative hit and a full team plus a sub. And I would have felt pretty good going into this week with that. And instead, I'm in the do I wild card or do I not?
Yeah.
So week 7 is the week that was. The one thing I'll throw out there, the Premier League has made it clear they are going to try to reschedule these matches for a specific window of time if possible. So their goal is to put all 10 of these matches in a 2 or 3 day period in midweek, which could mean for the first time ever, we could have a double game week where every single side is playing 2 matches. And we'll get to what kind of strategy that might bring and what that'll look like later in the season and maybe a little later in this discussion. So we talked a little about the wildcard versus free hit for week 8. I saw it in the Discord. For any of you that don't know, we have a Discord channel. You're all invited to join. It has all different channels, and it's a great discussion group. And we do a little bit of fantasy banter, good and bad in there, and even a little strategy, or as we should say, giving people bad advice. But there was a talk about free hit versus wild card this week. And I know, Matus, you were on the side of wild card. I really didn't weigh in. I think Jamie was on the side of maybe free hit. So what was the logic behind your stance of why the wild card is right, not just for you right now, but why you think that's the prudent move for the for the manager.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, everything is so dependent on what your team is structured like, right? If you're 2 or 3 moves away from being in a comfortable spot, a wild card doesn't make any sense because you're burning a great chip that you can use on a potential just -4. For me, when I'm thinking about a free hit, especially with the postponement of games and the potential of having that 1 week where every team has a double game week, that's the kind of week in my head where I think, okay, that's my free hit week, because whatever team I have coming up to that game week, you get to kind of see which teams are playing which teams in those 2 games. And then you free hit that game week to make sure you maximize the most that you can out of that 1 week alone. So for me, with how many moves I had to do on my team, I had the wild card given I think I made 6 different moves. And actually looking at my team, I think I changed my whole team. Never mind. 9 moves I think I made. So when it comes down to it, the free hit for me is almost a get out of jail free card for a specific time. And I feel like that's a valuable chip to hold on to and not burn right away, especially given this year where we have that extra wild card during the World Cup. It lets you hold on to that free hit even longer and make sure that you can deploy it when you feel it's really necessary. And I feel like if you're anywhere in between 2 to 4 transfers, using either one of those chips probably isn't a good idea. You're probably better off just taking the hit and moving forward, unless you haven't used your wild card yet and you still want to use it before the World Cup, because I know there might be plenty of people who don't want to use it till then. So that's kind of what I was looking at in my argument behind that.
So Jamie says, definitely a worthy topic. Wild card given also in January, free hit only once. And it's a great point. The powers that be, as Bickler would say, the folks who guard the 3 total servers for the 9 million players in the world, those folks in the ivory towers that guard those servers, or the Windows 95 PC that runs this thing, they were generous last year in giving us the second free hit in the second half of the season, and it honestly was a game changer for anyone who had already saved their first free hit. You had 2 free hits, a wild card, and a bench boost, maybe even a triple captain. You could play chips right down the stretch, and you could basically run down people in your mini leagues. I think this year the deployment is more important than ever. We talked about it in preseason with the extra wild card. My thought is this. I'm sort of with you with the get out of jail free card. There is always going to be a match week that has like 4 or 5 matches total come the end of the year. And for me, that match week is where you use the free hit. That's my strategy, is when there is a 3, 4, 5 week match week and I just need to load up on it. And I want to just get 3 Arsenal and 3 City, and and that's just me with wishful thinking that they'll be knocked out of the FA Cup by then. Probably not. It'll probably be 3 at Bournemouth, and well, I might as well just take the 0, keep my free hit. But the logic there is you deploy chips with information. And that's why I haven't smashed the wild card here, is that I still feel like there's an international break that comes, which I hate. Injuries happen, guys get rested, late returns. So I hate hitting it there. I don't like the next couple weeks for teams that I love, like Liverpool, like Chelsea, even with the match week that's off. So I don't want to deploy, because I don't wild card to a team that I'm going to have to transfer out of. When I make a wild card, my goal is to have 8 guys that are going to be on my match week for the next 6 weeks and know which tweaks I'm going to make. So I'm personally going to hold off, save my wild card, not going to use my free hit, and then I'm going to basically jam in some of these extra matches. And I'm going to hold my second overall wild card late in the season, maybe do what I did last year, which is wild card during one of the semi-double game weeks with the eye on a massive double game week. So I wild card the week before for the team that I'm going to bench boost the week after. So I know I have maximized my bench boost, because I think it's probably the least utilized chip. And if it's used well, it can be a real big differential for you, because you could pick up 50, 60 extra points. And if it's not really used well, it's, nothing at all. So to Jamie's question, the shirt is a beer company. So there's beer. There's a craft brewery in Burlington, Vermont called Burlington Beer Company. That's the BBCO. And they make really great beers. My wife and I went up there during our anniversary, right after we got married for a few days. We were drinking our way through the entire city, and I was talking a bunch of footy with people inside the pub. And the guy said, "Do you know that we make custom soccer jerseys basically for our beers?" And this is actually one of their beers.
That's
and
awesome.
Everywhere I go, someone asks me like what club that is and where it is from. And I'm like, Burlington, Vermont. And they're like, there's no club in Burlington, Vermont. And I was like, well, if you drink enough, you'll find the club. So, Jamie, thank you for that. So let's just take a look here. Let's start before we go to the team reveals. Let's bring up the top transfers in. And I think this makes total sense, right? We're talking, no, Jim, no flares or burns in it yet.
Keyword, yet.
Let's see what happens after I end up freaking out 10 minutes before the thing happens, hitting the wild card, being pissed off, and scoring like 14 points, and the team I had would have scored 65. Transfers in. Doesn't really surprise me. Mm-hmm. I didn't think there was anyone on the planet that really gave Eddie Howe more love than me. But clearly the fantasy world is loving Newcastle and what Eddie Howe is doing, as they are basically the soup du jour, because picks like 6 and 9 on this list are Botman and Alan St. Maximin. So it's literally like 5 of the top 10 transfers in this week are Newcastle players. I absolutely love Trippier. He's already in my team. He'd be on my side if he wasn't. What are your thoughts on the guys on the screen? Any of them that scare you and you want to tell people pump the brakes and stay away?
I can't tell anyone to stay away because I literally wildcarded every single one of those players into my team. So I feel really basic right now and seeing that, and then realizing, I mean, I have a couple different differentials that I think might be nice, but out of those 5 transfers in, I did take in all of them. And when it comes to Newcastle, their next run of fixtures, you can't argue against that. I think that's a big reason why people brought in the likes of Trippier and Pope. They'll have lots of chances for good cleans, and then Isak is going to be able to find enough chances on goal to make that. At 7 million, it's worth the shot. So none of those guys surprise me at all. Mitrovic has proven to be, oh my God, what's the word? Fixture proof. Sorry. Yeah. Mitro has proven to be fixture proof. So just having him in the team is great. He's gone up almost $500,000 already this year. So, and De Bruyne, I think the big reason for De Bruyne that we're seeing that massive change is dropping Mo, because the next level of a premium mid that a lot of people like is De Bruyne. I know Son's getting a little bit more love now, but I think that's the reason why we see De Bruyne so high on the list, is because people are getting rid of Mo, and they want to still keep a premium enough midfielder in their team.
Yeah, I definitely understand the Mo to KDB talk. You can't go wrong with De Bruyne. If you look at his numbers, honestly, back to like last March, he's basically the best fantasy player. Obviously, what Haaland is doing right now is like otherworldly. He plays 35 minutes and he scores you 15 points every week. And I mean, he plays for 70 minutes, but if you only have to touch the ball once every 3 minutes, you basically should only get credit for a third of the time. But Mitrovic, he might be fixture proof. He's not, galley proof, because that dude has done nothing but destroy fantasy teams that I manage since the day he got into the Premier League with Newcastle. I picked him up 15 minutes after I picked him up in his first Newcastle performance. He scored 2 goals and then got a red card, then came back from the suspension that I waited through for him and got another red card. So then I had him the whole Fulham year. So it's like a Schadenfreude love-hate thing. It just scares me to put him on my side. So I don't know that I'm going to be able to do it. He's in my plans for this week, and I'm still struggling with it. I have a little worry about Isak, because I'm not sure when Callum Wilson is 100% fit, they won't play 2 at the top. And Isak has played wide at times in his time at La Liga. So there's a little fear for me that him and Alan St. Maximin might start eating up each other's minutes or taking up each other's space on the pitch. The one on the screen that I love the most, honestly, is Nick Pope. I can't make the move because I hate transfers with keepers. But Nick Pope has been so good for Newcastle. I mean, they've given up like second or third most shots in the Premier League, third least amount of goals. His save numbers are through the roof. You can tell that their defense is so much better because of his organization in front of him. And I'm telling you, I say it all the time and people laugh at me. They yell at me. If I'm Gareth Southgate, he is probably starting game 1 of the World Cup. I still think he's the best keeper England has. I know Ramsdale's been good at times, but he's got a flapping mistake in him at any moment. And Pickford is, well, as good as he is for England, he's still Jordan Pickford, and I'm not putting him on my side or at the top of any list except for, well, I'm not going to say it out loud. So, players coming in, big-time numbers here, and I think we know why. And it has a lot to do with this, and I'll argue you will never see a screenshot like this again, where the top 3 players out are Liverpool talent. Now, I know they're not playing this week, but this has more to do with how they're playing.
Yeah.
Did you have all 3 of those top players before you wildcard it?
I've had Robbo this whole time. So I had Mo, Trent, and Robbo, and so those are the 3. All 3 of them left my team, which is hard for me to say because I know at the beginning of the year we made a mockery of Trent's price and he was kind of the guy to have the whole year. I think with missing two games here and then the international break, I feel like I can swallow it a little easier knowing that coming back, I left some room in my team in case I do need to make a double move. I can get any of these guys back in if I wanted to, because I wanted to make sure I had a route back to Salah, a route back to Trent. But yeah, it's tough to look at and just seeing why the reason is, and not necessarily the postponement, but just the level of play itself.
Good friend David Cosgrove chimes in with Gareth Southgate is the type of person who claps when the plane lands. And, for those of you who are new listeners to either this or the Monday podcast, you will know that Kazi is born and raised in Liverpool, England, as that can be seen or heard by the ununderstandable words that come out of his Scout's mouth. But honestly, the idea is spot on from Kazi, because Southgate literally looks confused, but I might be confused too if I voluntarily put that outfit on every time I went to a football match. I just don't understand it. I don't know if he's like looking for a job as a lookalike somewhere in London, or if he's just trying to find himself a new sponsorship with a 17-piece suit outfit. But Gareth Southgate really does need to look in the mirror probably and start starting his best talented players and not the players that helped him 4 years ago. But that is a topic for another podcast. When we look at the names going out here, does Jesus surprise you, or do you think this has more to do with the fixture turn that's coming for Arsenal in the coming weeks?
Yeah, it's definitely the fixture turn. I know I went off of them because their next 5 is brutal. And so I feel like sticking to at least one part of that Arsenal attack makes sense, but at that price, Martinelli would make the most sense. So I think if you see a lot of people getting off Jesus, they'll still have an Arsenal attacker in Martinelli, possibly Saka still. But at the price point, it makes sense because they've got, let's see here. I know when they come back. So they've got Brentford, Tottenham, Liverpool, Leeds. It's not great. So we'll see how it goes. But I think that's the main reason, is the fixture turn more so than anything.
Yeah, and Pascal Gross makes sense. Brighton doesn't have a match this week. He's a player that many people brought into their sides to play every week at that price. Mm-hmm. So when you got a $6 million player that you're relying on to play like and score you points like an $8 million midfielder, you almost need to make the move off of him. And I have to be honest, I'm a little nervous with Brighton. Love Brighton, love their story, love their start. got to see what it looks like under the new manager, because I have this like sinking feeling that they may sink a bit in the table, almost from the idea that we all know they were a better collection as a whole than the individual parts.
Yeah.
And now the person that put all that together, that gave them the philosophy, bred the confidence, and told them to go play football, you know, is looking good in his own suit at Stamford Bridge, you know. And now we get somebody chiming in with Sean Dyche to Brighton. And that is just not fair to the good people of Brighton, folks. Why would you do that to the good people of Brighton? I could see him literally walking in and just being like, looking around and being like, Webster, you, center forward. I need a 7-foot center forward. Webster, you're up front.
You are my wood.
Trossard, your name's Tommy. You're going to play left back. Like, it'd be terrible. Terrible, terrible, terrible. So, well, we talked about your moves, so let's move to Matus's side.
Voila.
Your wild card. Jumped that slide a bit. Matus's wild card, you went to Pope. You still have Ward. Makes sense. Trippier, Cancelo, Emerson, Patterson, and Williams. So you went with 2 fodders. I like it. Andreas. And you went with Bowen. So I had Bowen to talk about if we got to kind of players to look at or punts to take. So talk to me about the Bowen and the Isak decisions and why, because I think everything else sort of speaks for itself.
Yeah, and those were the last 2 positions I was looking at. I was thinking I had 15 million to spend. So do I want to spend it more in the mid, more in the forward, or do I want to split it up more evenly? And what it came down to was I think Bowen is too good not to find some of that form back that he had last year. And with West Ham's run of fixtures coming up, they've got Everton away, Wolves at home, Fulham at home, Southampton away. Those are 4 potential great fixtures to get at least 1 return out of each game. And so in that position, I was also thinking maybe going Sterling, but I just want to see how Chelsea plays the first few weeks under Potter. I kind of similarly to the effect with Brighton is, not only did Potter leave, but he took his whole staff with him. So that's the thing. I didn't want to take any chances with Gross. I think Trossard was a fun pick that could have fit in there as well. And then so I thought that maybe with Bowen's run of fixtures coming up, I could split that money between the midfield and the forward. And I think for me, it was between Isak and Tony. And I felt like at the time, and this is right now, I still have a little bit of time to make any changes with the wild card. I felt that I liked Isak a little more than Tony, even given that when Wilson comes back, I still have a little bit more faith in Isak for some reason. Just because I like their run of fixtures a little bit more than Brentford's. So that's kind of where my head was at. If I do move off of, I thought about doing the Mitrovic, Holland, Kane situation. I know there's several people doing that, kind of shifting the game strategy from big at the back to big up front, which we haven't seen in a while from big FPL managers. Because I think there's a lot of good value up front there too. So if I don't change my mind, or if I do change my mind, I should say, I could see myself spending the extra money to get up to Kane and then coming down from Bowen. And I'd have to downgrade a little bit elsewhere too, just to make that work. But I think I just wanted two price points that I can move from, right? And with Kulusevski there at 8.1, I love that choice because I think he's going to have a great run of fixtures with Tottenham. I didn't necessarily, if I wasn't going to spend it on Kane or Son, I think Kulu is going to be a good part of that. And so I have De Bruyne there. I can move to Mo if I need to. I have the couple 8.1s I can move down and up from if need be. And then I have the Isak at 7 that I can move up and down from depending, what else I need to do. So I think just each price point I like the most just for possible movement after the next 4 to 5 game weeks.
So Eric McGrath, or as those who have watched our morning cup of coffee here and tea segments daily and is known as Maka, says nothing wrong with Sean Dyche, a great red bearded man with a belly and a weird voice. I'll agree on basically all 3 of those things being facts. And I will agree that this is the most Sean Dyche has ever been mentioned in a fantasy podcast of any kind because, well, why would anyone talk about Sean Dyche's team or his players when talking about fantasy football, unless you were talking about playing attackers against him? So I'm going to ask you one quick question before I give you a little critique and my thoughts on your wild card and some of the players you have in there and the logic. So 2 questions for you. 1, how much money do you have left over right now in the pile?
0.
Okay. And 2, that's a good answer, because if you had told me you had a single tenth of $1 and you had Emerson Royal instead of Perisic, I'd literally maybe run you off the show and eject you from the seat. And then my other question is who is sitting this week for you with this team?
So when I was looking at it with this team in mind, I was thinking of a 3-4-3. So I've got Nico, Patterson, and Andreas Pereira sitting. I'm still kind of struggling with that a little bit because I feel like the fixture against Forest for Fulham looks really good, and I think I'd want Andreas Pereira for that, but I'm just struggling to see who to take out in that situation because Kulusevski against Leicester is a great fixture for me. Isak against Bournemouth is a great fixture for me. So it kind of maybe comes down to Martinelli against Brentford and Bowen against Everton, but I don't know why I would wildcard Bowen in just to sit him. So that, for me, if I happen to take the hit and miss out on some points with Andreas on the bench, I've been doing it all fucking year anyway, so not like I need to worry about that now.
Too.
So, I might as well just keep it as is and then hope that he doesn't score a bunch of points off the bench, and then I made the right decision. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from there. I feel like there's a few of these that are tough. I think I think it's a reach for Emerson Royal. I know what you want. You want a piece of the Spurs defense. They have a decent run of fixtures. He offers a little attacking threat. His actual underlying numbers have been good, even though he's been poor, in my opinion. I'm fearful. I'm fearful, and we'll get to my thoughts on Spurs and the rotation risks that I think are coming. Now, it is 1 week before an international break that he won't have to worry about because, shock, he wasn't called up by Brazil. But I'd be a little nervous, honestly, about Kulusevski. So I think there's a real thing happening at Spurs, and it's going to be hard for the Liverpool, red dying supporters that hear this here. Richarlison is absolutely betting in as a key component to their squad, and he makes them better every time he comes on the pitch. Now, Conte likes impact subs, but he gave him the start with Kane in the Champions League. He started Son over Kulusevski in the last Premier League match. And I'm wondering if Kulusevski isn't starting to almost be dumped into the super sub role. And I also think at some point that could be Son, which is why I'm nervous about any of those three. Because right now, the key from a fantasy perspective is if Richarlison starts for Spurs at 8.1 million, it's a steal if you get your way into that attack and you have Harry Kane setting him up. And we know that the man can score because he scored goals at a terrible club, a breadth of talent in Everton. He's only going to score goals with better players around him, and I think we're starting to see that.
Yeah.
And I think we're starting to see why they spent $65 million on him. So I'm a little worried about that one. I think Emerson's a little bit of a stretch. I personally, I'd rather have Nathan Ake at $5 million and you have a second City defender, but then you would, you counteract your De Bruyne move. Some Arsenal ones you can't really jam with anymore, but I think there will be some really big moves that you could still have a couple tweaks. I think if you looked at this side a little bit between now and the deadline.
Yeah.
Are you done though?
No, I mean, this is what I came up with right now. I'm probably going to take a couple deeper looks and see what other pieces I can move around. I think the only thing for me when it comes to Emerson Royal, he hasn't been rotated as heavily as Perisic. And I understand that things can change, and I would rather have Perisic and spend that extra almost half mil, 0.4, whatever it is. But with where I was at with all these players and the prices, Royal just made the most sense at the time. And he's put in at least 85 minutes per match in the Premier League this year. So that's the only thing that I'm sitting with. So yeah, I'm definitely not done. Probably might see a couple more changes by tomorrow for sure. You are muted.
I wanted to make sure that I didn't pick up any background noise here. Sorry about that. You have a good start here. I think it's a really solid side. I think that you're in a much better shape than I am because you hit the wild card. So as you see here, this is my side currently. I've made no moves yet. I have 2 free transfers. On the whole, I don't have a problem with this side going into this week. Like I'll play Bailey against Southampton. We just talked about Andreas not being a bad run against Nottingham Forest. I still have Cancelo, Trippier, and Saliba. I don't love Ward, obviously. He's more of a fodder fill for me. It's kind of a killer that Brighton's not playing, but it's what moves do I make? So where I'm stuck right now is, do I smash the wild card and rip the team up? My problem is for this week, I don't know that I would move out more than like 4 players maybe, and 2 of them I was going to move out anyways. So, I think with the way I'm looking at it, I'm going to hold on to Reece James. I think Reece James right now, it pains me to say this, is the best attacking fullback playing in the Premier League. Statistically, I think, and I don't mean this in, I don't mean that in the look of he's a better player than Trent Alexander-Arnold, but right now, his confidence and the side he's in, the way they're going to play, I feel like their formation is going to only suit him under Potter. So I'm going to keep James, stash him on the bench. Going to transfer out Alexander-Arnold and Salah, and I'm going to bring in 2 players. The question is, do I make a third transfer and kind of reconstruct the side, take the -4? To the Facebook user who I can't see, letting me know that I have Danny Ward in goal. I love your jokes. I don't know. We need to make fun of the disabled tonight on the podcast, but I do have the 4th highest scoring goaltender on my bench who doesn't have a match this week. And if he was playing, he'd be playing. So Sanchez is a good pick. And, if they want to post up their scores and overall where they stand overall, or send in their team, we'd love to review it for them on a future pod. But the way that we look at this side, I think it comes down to, do I take the -4? I've tried really hard to not take any hits. I haven't taken any this year. I could get away with gambling that every one of these players will start and not have any injuries or any problem issues. I don't love that. And I also don't know that I love the build of leaving that much money on the deck. And I'm not going to spend 20 million if I move off of Trent and Mo. And at this point, I feel like carrying Mo at 13 million is just really bad value and a really bad play. So I think what I'm looking at here is Mo, Trent, and possibly Greenwood. And then it comes down to like 3 different moves. Taking a page out of what you were talking about earlier and turning Greenwood into Kane, and probably dropping Salah into Madison, which then would allow me to fill in whatever money is left on the bench. I'm not exactly sure what that does for me again. I think it allows me to get up to like a 5-2. So I can't get all the way to Perisic that I would love. Mm-hmm. The other option, of course, is go Greenwood to Mitrovic, Salah to KDB, and then I can basically have any defender I want. So it's kind of like a mixed bag for me. I just feel like that Harry Kane looks ripe right now. Like, Harry Kane's probably the only player in the whole game I would seriously consider captaining over Haaland this week.
Yeah, I feel like at this point, Haaland is just almost the permanent captain. It's hard to argue against it now.
At some point, if you want to make moves, though, in the standings and you're sitting at 1.3 million and you want to get to the top of the American Scouser Cup by the end of the year, you gotta make those moves. And
Yeah.
I wanted to captain Jesus in the second week of the year, and I couldn't get the stones to take it off Holland after making the mistake week 1, and Jesus goes for 18 and Holland goes for 5. So it's those 26-point swings that has me in third place of our cup right now instead of 30th. And it's those decisions, I think, that are going to be coming for players that want to make moves. So with me right now, it's looking most likely like a 2 to 3 person transfer. I'm going to stash Diaz on the bench. I'm going to stash James on the bench. And if I make those 3 moves, I'll have a working sub. So my question to you is, should I buy a cheap fodder player to stash on that bench that might get some minutes and play the full side, including Bailly and Andreas? Or would you buy 2 or 3 quality players and then sit either Bailly or Andreas as my top one? And if you tell me to sit Bailly and then he goes off and hauls again like he did last week, I will be so upset. But tell me what you think is the right call.
Well, this is going to come down to when, I know this might be difficult to answer, but when are you planning to use that wild card? Right after the international break or 2 weeks after? Or are you going to try to wait it out until right before the World Cup?
I won't do it before the World Cup because I get unlimited transfers during the World Cup.
I meant like a couple weeks up to the World Cup.
Yeah, I don't believe I would hit it next week, but I might. Honestly, the wild card to me is going to be hit as soon as Liverpool look like Liverpool.
Get them back in.
Because that's my way of not worrying about – that's why I'm not worried about dropping Salah right now and going to Maddison, who I think is the best midfielder in the 7-8 to 8-2 range. I think over the next 5 game weeks, Maddison is the best pick. He's been scoring points even when they've been bad.
Yeah.
And, he's on free kicks. He's on set pieces. He's scoring goals. And at some point, that offense is going to click, and their fixtures look really enticing after Spurs. So, for me, I think Maddison is a good shout. And, I could go down to Guimaraes even and pick up a lot of extra money. I'm all over the place because like you mentioned earlier, I'm seriously thinking about jumping off big at the back and leaning towards, double premiums up top and not even being afraid to have Jesus. And Jesus probably becomes Mitrovic next week. And then the week after, I probably wild card and keep all 3 of those forwards or drop one of them and slide it in. We're going to have that weird period too, where at some point they are going to start resting these players with all these matches.
Yeah.
So I feel like I have to get back to probably having 3 active playing bench players if I want to continue. And I think that's where you wild card into. Like you wild card into a team that's going to be your squad for 4 or 5 weeks. So I think I'm in my 3 transfer move. I don't know it's the right decision. I'll guarantee it'll blow me up. But the projections I do, well, after I make those moves, I score like 17 to 18 points more, which makes taking the -4 worth it.
Yeah. And
if I rip a wild card,
right?
Who the hell knows?
Right. And it's really amazing to see what the Salah money produces. I feel like preseason, right, we all had Mo and the Tinkers, and we were looking and looking, and then the second that you would try to do a Tinker without Mo, you're like, oh, look at all this extra money I have. But then you're like, no, I can't go without Mo. So then now, with wildcarding this week, it's kind of amazing to see how much it really opens up by just going off of him a bit. And I think it's at this point where the game's going to start to get a little bit interesting, because I think people are going to start to get off of that main template and start to do different things that not everyone else is doing. And I think, there are going to be certain players that are going to stay in that template. I think Holland is one that's going to stay in. Cancelo is going to stay if things go as well as they've been going for them. Martinelli is a great piece at that price. But I like where you were thinking in moving Greenwood up to a playable forward, I think, and dropping Salah down. Because even if I know not for this week, but someone like Rashford at 6'6", if he's going to still play up top, And, it depends on Martial coming back. But if Rashford at 6'6" is playing up top for Ten Hag, that's great. Rodrigo at 6'3", he's going to be coming back early October. So that's another mid-priced mid that you can drop from Salah down to that would work out in your favor. Even if you just did, like you mentioned, if you just drop the $3 million down to Sterling, that's an extra $3 million that you can, if you drop Trent down, let's say $2.5 million, that's 5.5 plus from Greenwood that you can go up, and you can go just about any forward you want to. So I feel like you're in a decent spot to not have to worry about doing a wild card or worrying about that 4-point hit, because I think you'll make it back. And I think it'll be worth it for the next few weeks after that to look back on it and justify that decision of taking the hit by making that third transfer. I think that would work in your favor.
And exactly as we, and it takes me back to my earlier comment. It's why I was so frustrated with losing my transfer last week. If I just make one of those 3 moves last week, yeah, I'm able to make these 2 moves this week at nothing, or even make a third move this week for the little reconstruction. I've made 4 moves in 2 weeks. I've rebuilt my team. I've almost wild carded out of what I would have done. And I'm picking up a third wild card for the year, basically.
Yeah.
And it was frustrating. And that's why I think, like, for players that really care and want to play the game, you take advantage of every rule change, every little break in the rules, anything that can help you, you take advantage of it. Whether it's, managers who talk too much in the press conferences. If you listen to some of these managers, they'll basically tell you players that are not going to play. And then there's other managers like Pep that, mentioned someone wasn't in training for 3 days and they start. Like there's just 2 different types of managers, but there is a lot of information out there. So we're going to end it with this. Probably one more segment, 5-10 minutes, talk about players that are on kind of your watch list. So we talked a lot about guys, and I know some of them you brought in. If you were looking at right now defenders that you would recommend to players out there, and not the high name ones, the Jameses, the Trents, I'm looking for more of the punts, guys that you think might be able to add some value, have a good run of fixtures, something in there that makes you see their stock going up, I guess, if you were trending like a stock.
Yeah. Let's see. I think looking at it, kind of look at the fixtures, right? See which teams are playing which teams. And going back to before, I know Newcastle was a very popular choice. So someone like Fabian Schär could be one. Only owned by 8.7% of players in all of FPL. I know Botman was really high on the transfer in list that you mentioned earlier, but he's actually owned by less players than Schär is. Someone potentially like Diogo Dalot for Manchester United. I know he's missing this week, but if they click as well as they can, and he's playing under Ten Hag, he's playing every match. He's getting up the field. He's having some good attacking returns. So that at 4.5 is a decent punt to try out. Given what's going to go on with Brighton, not sure yet. I think I was really excited about Estupiñán right before Potter left, and right after Potter left, I got him straight out of my team. Also didn't help that he didn't play the full match under Potter as well. So that's someone, if things go back to going well for Brighton, that might be someone to look at. Ben Mee at Brentford, they don't have the easiest run of fixtures, but it's not the worst either. They got Arsenal, Bournemouth, Newcastle, Brighton, Chelsea, Aston Villa, Wolves, Forest to kind of almost get you up to the World Cup. So lots of decent opportunity for points there. So and then maybe lastly, someone like Emerson at West Ham. So he's only 4 million, owned by less than 2% of players in the game. And he's someone that is going to be playing 90 minutes over the next foreseeable future, I guess. And especially with the fixtures they have, I could see him having some decent returns.
Yeah, it's funny you said that. I had one of those guys on I had 3 guys written down. I had one of them on there. It was Ben Mee. I think it's a good shout. I think that Brentford's defense is underrated. At times I've had Raya in net, and he's always been a solid keeper. Vladimir Sufal at West Ham, I think, is another one at his price point. The fact that he gives you opportunity for attacking returns, and West Ham's fortunes have to turn, and they're right at the same time that their fixtures are, which has got to be a helpful one. I do like the Emerson shout. I've actually thought about bringing Emerson in for Trent, pocketing $3 million, then pocketing my money on Mo, and really being able to bang up with maybe there I can probably fit the threemium with Kane, KDB, and Holland. But the other one for me, but it's a wait and see, is I absolutely love the idea of a $4.4 million defender at Chelsea. So if Fofana shows that he wins a starting spot under Potter, and I don't know that you spend $75 million for a player and then don't start him, but I've seen Chelsea do some really dumbass shit, like give up on Kevin De Bruyne. So, and Mo Salah. But to be fair, Mo didn't look as good. At times, De Bruyne actually looked a player. You just could tell that Jose Mourinho and him were never going to get along because those two people have never smiled in their life. Could you imagine those two at a training session together? It would be the most uncomfortable and miserable fucking shithousery and like just the worst. It would just be two guys bitching at each other, pouting in the corner. But it would be fun to watch. So we'll move off the defenders. I think we've already touched on the goalkeepers. There's Nick Pope. There's a pretty drop off to everybody else. Leicester's got great fixtures. Too bad they don't have a great keeper. It's not very much else to write home there. I'll start with the midfielders. I mentioned Madison earlier. I think your shout about Bowen, it's not as much a punt when a guy's $8.5 million, but I think a player like Bowen has been knocked down a few rungs based on his start. And then if you're looking for a real differential out there, I think Morgan Gibbs-White at Nottingham Forest could become an absolute star. He's the record signing. Now, that's saying something when you make 255,000 signings in the summer. But they did pay more for Morgan Gibbs-White than any other player. He's a big-time talent. We heard about him for years at Wolves, linked with all the bigger clubs. And I think this is his time to really kick on. And I think Forest needs him. They need him to honestly be the player they thought they were getting in Jesse Lingard, to create, to play off the striker. What about you for tour? Just real quick, couple midfielders you like on a punt list that you'd put out there for our listeners?
If you're thinking West Ham and you're kind of worried about Bowen, maybe someone like Lucas Paqueta at 6 wouldn't be a bad shout just because he's going to be part of that. I liked the Gibbs-White shout. I had him on my watch list as well. With Leicester's fixtures coming up, like you mentioned, Dewsbury Hall, I don't think is a terrible choice either at $5 million, owned by only 1.3% of players in the game. So those are, and then, I think I was trying to look at someone else, but I think that was pretty much it. The only other one that I kind of like is Eze, because Crystal Palace's next every fixture until the World Cup is nice, is just really nice. And I mean, they've got home Chelsea, but then after that, it's Leeds, Leicester, Wolves, Everton, Southampton, West Ham, Forest, Fulham, Bournemouth. Like, that is such an incredible run of fixtures that getting someone like Eze at 5.5 could be a steal.
I like it. Probably the area where there's the most value right now, which is shocking coming out of anything in the last 2 or 3 years in fantasy EPL, is the striker's position. So let's just be fair, and I think we've talked up. We both probably have Isak on the list. We've talked him up during this show, and we've said Mitrovic is basically fixture proof, except for if the fixture happens to be a week in which he is part of my squad. So give me a couple. Who are your next two that you're looking at? And it can't be Holland or Kane.
Damn. So in the same breath of Crystal Palace, if you don't want to go with Eze, you can go with someone with like Edouard at 5.3. That's kind of, with a lot of people have Archer as sort of, or Greenwood as sort of their bench fodder. So with Edouard only being $1 million more than those two guys, I think that leaves you a lot of extra room anywhere else if you want a forward that's going to be starting, that's going to have some great fixtures ahead. And then depending on how Potter goes, maybe Havertz could be someone to look back into. because I know he's fallen off a bit, but I think Potter might be the guy to bring him back. I don't know if the Aubameyang experiment is going to work under Potter, so I would keep an eye on Havertz, and then let's throw Dominic Solanke out there. Bournemouth has good fixtures coming up. They've got a run against Brentford, Leicester, Fulham, and Southampton, and so at 5.7 for Solanke, who is pretty integral to their attacking threat, it might be a decent shout.
Scored a very good goal recently, has been playing really well since coming back from the injury. Almost looks a little bit relieved that Scott Parker's not his manager anymore. I know, shocking. Gally comes out with an insult to Scott Parker. Stop the presses. And I think that there is something there to Solanke. I like your shout about Edouard outside of the fact that there's still rotation risk there with Mateta, and sometimes them just playing the false nine, even playing Ayew through the middle. And that makes me a little nervous. And to the fact that Zaha is still on penalties and is still the talisman there. And I think if you're going to stump 5-3 for Edouard, you find the extra 0.5 or 0.6 and you go with Johnson for Nottingham Forest. I think the sub 6 million striker, it's between Johnson and Solanke for me. I was really disappointed that the Delap kid didn't get his move to South, or the Cole Palmer kid didn't get the move to Southampton. Delap didn't get his move to Southampton because that would have put a 4.5 million starter out there. I also was really bummed out that, Broha hasn't gotten a look in at being Chelsea's, focal point through the middle, because I really do believe if he got a chance, he might have won him. So I think Tuchel was actually grooming him to be the number 9 by the end of the year. He was giving him minutes, big minutes late in matches. And then, of course, that just didn't work out. We'll see what Potter does. Potter doesn't play with a traditional big number 9. I mean, he voluntarily plays Danny Welbeck, even though he bought a striker every single window for 3 years and then sells him because it just doesn't fit. So, I hear your Havertz shout. I've never seen the player. Never. Not once. Didn't see him at Bayern Leverkusen. Haven't seen him for the German national team. I've never seen the player that people talk about as world class for Chelsea. I've never just seen the guy. And I know he's got the tall frame and he looks the part, but it just doesn't. I don't know that that's ever going to click. That looks an awful lot like Alvaro Morata to me in a Chelsea uniform. He might go somewhere else and be great, but I just don't know that Chelsea will ever get that out of Havertz. And I question whether or not this will be the end of the Havertz experiment, because you don't play. His best role is playing in the 10, in my opinion, Havertz, off a real striker. The best player at Chelsea is Mason Mount, and his best role is playing in the 10 off a real striker. Yeah. So whether that's Aubameyang, whether that's Broha, or whether that's, Chelsea going out and buying Romelu Lukaku for the 7th time, they're going to try to make moves. Just makes me laugh to think about that. But I think the bigger side of things and, where and what we do is probably the moves that happen this week should be things that you're doing for weeks to come.
Yeah.
And I think that's always the struggle with these truncated weeks, shortened weeks. And I think sometimes we put too much onus on these short weeks. So to all of the folks out there that have sent in teams to us, that commented tonight, that hung out in our first ever live Premier League show, please let us know what you think. We love the feedback. Send us instant messages. Send us private messages. Send all the good quality compliments to me. Send all the hate to Matus. It will work out great. Everyone will be happy. But from all of us here at American Scouser, we appreciate you following and liking all of the items on our channel. If you haven't yet, please hit subscribe, like, share, comment. If you think that a friend of yours would like the information we're putting out there from a fantasy standpoint, from a betting standpoint, from a league standpoint, our podcast, please share. We're trying to get the word out. We're trying to get more eyeballs so we can get more great content. And lastly, If you're hearing this and you think this looks fun and something you'd like to get involved with, we're always looking for new volunteers and contributors in a variety of different ways. And we would love to see you get involved with us here at AmericanScouser.com as well. Matus, any parting or final words before we say goodnight to the listeners?
Let's hope that we regret getting rid of Mo and Trent as much as possible.
I like the way that you're going with this. They'll be back in my side as soon as they look like the side that I remember seeing. So with that, I hope all of your transfers work, your hits are worthwhile, your wild cards turn out true. If you free hit, well, shame on you. All right, everyone, thank you. Have a great week.